few years ago, I began a new spiritual journey. I was raised a Christian, but tired of my confusion and denying my gifts, I decided to take a new path of discovery and internal growth. Along the way, one thing I realized was how many others are in a similar place in their lives, knowing there's more, but stuck in their own conditioning or doubt. So I decided to start this podcast as a way of vocalizing the things I was learning. But then it became something more. I decided to blend my own quest for self-discovery with a deep dive into the fascinating world of Cajun culture. We'll unravel the unexpected connections between these two paths and how they play a unique role in guiding us towards healing and growth, hopefully while offering insights and inspiration. I'm Heather, and this is Soulful Wanderings with the Pretend Cajun. Are you coming along for the ride? So for those of you that are following along at home, you may have noticed that I skipped an episode. Truth be told, a little bit of life happened. We went on vacation, which I had planned for, but then some other things came up and, well, to be honest, it just didn't work out. But I thought parts of my vacation may actually be pretty fun to talk about. So as the title suggests, this is about hauntings in Memphis, and we'll be talking about different types of spirits, etc., to explain some of this. So I just wanted to say, if that subject matter is triggering to you or makes you uncomfortable in any way, you may want to proceed with caution, because I won't be censoring my language when I'm talking about hauntings and things like that. So just keep that in mind. So the quick backstory, for various reasons, we decided to go to Memphis for a few days just recently. Neither one of us had ever been, and we both absolutely love music, so we knew that would be a great thing to explore there. And of course, the barbecue. I mean, who doesn't love barbecue? So it seemed like it'd be fun. And of course, as we were doing the obligatory what to do in Memphis Google search, I saw that they offered a haunted tour. And I didn't think we'd really do it because, I mean, my husband, while being very supportive, isn't always into the things like I am. I had made a note of some of the places that they mentioned for the tours and thought, if we can find them, maybe we might just sort of drive by them or something like that and just kind of see what they look like maybe, and that'd probably be about it. But then he saw it when he was doing a search, and he was like, let's do this. And of course I questioned him. I checked his temperature and all of those things, but he seemed genuinely okay with it, and he even thought it would be fun. He said, I mean, as long as you think you'll be okay energy-wise, which of course we've talked about all my energy and how processing it has been challenging for me. And, he's not wrong, but I was sure I could do it. I mean, I wasn't overly concerned. So off we went. And I mean, it's a touristy thing and all of that, but you know what? It did not disappoint. We took a bus tour version. There's a walking tour as well. And it's called Historical Haunts, which of course was based at a metaphysical shop there in Memphis that of course we returned to the next day to make purchases. And that night was perfect. It was dark and it was a little bit chilly in early October. So, perfect time of year to do this. And look, just as an FYI, if you guys are watching the lives that I'm doing with Gina Zitlow, we're doing those on her Gina Zitlow Healing page on Facebook. You may have actually heard some of this on there, so just a heads up. But this is a little bit more, probably a little bit more in depth on a couple of things. But it really was a fun night, though, and I actually learned some new things that I didn't know about. It was kind of fun. The first place we went was ceremonial mounds. There are actually mounds like this in several places in Memphis, and they're not all burial mounds. Some of them are ceremonial Native American mounds. And of course, they went through the story of why people believe Memphis is cursed. I mean, so many things have happened there that, I don't know, they may not be wrong. And it actually goes all the way back to LaSalle and DeSoto. But for me, what was even more fascinating was what was happening in the mound. So I'm sure you figured out by now that I had shielded pretty heavily before we went out. And in fact, I was shielding every day that we were there, especially since we were going to be around so many people. I mean, customarily in my normal day, I'm not around a huge amount of people, but this was very different being in a touristy town. So I was pretty well shielded when we went out. So I guess my senses weren't completely open because I was kind of blocked a little bit on purpose. Plus I was listening to our guide because I wanted to hear the stories and I wanted to be present in that moment and what she was telling us. So I wasn't really, tapping in very much to the places we were going. I would do a little bit if there was a lull maybe in her story or something. But, I would kind of take a minute and get a general sense of what was going on there. And of course, at that particular place, I picked up on a lot of what I would say was general energy. It felt like soldiers that had been through there because, of course, a lot of different soldiers and explorers and different things, different groups of people, rather, had been through that area. And so I was just feeling a lot of different people. But, nothing was really too negative or over the top or anything. It was very normal energy. And I didn't take the time to see if I could sort of pick up on anyone individually. I didn't kind of try to separate what I was feeling. It just wasn't what I wanted to do in that evening. Maybe if we went back, I might try, but that just wasn't what I was there for. But I was picking up on the different energies kind of stacked on top of each other. And I also picked up on something else, but I couldn't really identify it. It didn't feel bad per se, but it didn't feel like a person. So I actually wasn't quite sure what it was. And like I said, I wasn't tapping in too heavily. So I kind of made a note of it and moved on. But part of the story that they were telling us was that when the soldiers were there, they would store things like munitions inside this mound. But many of them didn't like going in there, because there was often evidence that the things had been disturbed or maybe even ripped apart. I feel like she used the word that some of them had exploded, but I don't know how that would happen inside the mound without it destroying the mound. So maybe that's not really what she meant, or maybe I misunderstood. But basically, things had happened to these munitions while they were inside that mound. So I think they believed that something was going on in there, and, they probably were right. So finally, I believe it's just been in the past probably 20, well, maybe 30 years or so, the city finally decided that they needed to close up that opening. There was just, an opening so you could walk inside the mound, because, kids and I think some animals, pets and whatnot would go in there, and they just felt like it wasn't safe. Imagine that. So anyway, they hired somebody to close it up, and the contractor that they hired put brick over it, kind of a brick. It almost looks like a little door over that opening. And of course, he went home. And as the story goes, the next day his supervisor called and he was like, "Hey, can you go finish that job up today at the mounds?" And the guy's thinking, "I thought I did. Okay, maybe I didn't. Maybe I'm not remembering something." So he went back, and apparently some of the bricks were displaced. Maybe some of the kids in the neighborhood or something had moved them, which I don't know if I mentioned that. These mounds are actually right by a neighborhood. But anyway, so he decided, okay, whatever. maybe I'm just kind of imagining things. And he fixed it and he went home. So the next day he gets a call again from his supervisor. Look, you need to go finish this job. And he thinks, this is odd. But, once again, he goes and he fixes the disturbed bricks. And this kind of went on for evidently at least a couple of more days, with his supervisor starting to kind of get angry with him, calling him, look, I need you to finish this job. And so the next time he went, they said the bricks looked as if they had been blown away, and they actually kind of went out several feet from the opening. So, of course, no one really knew what had caused that to happen. And of course, they were eventually able to close it for good. And if you go by there now, you can see that bricked in area, and it's closed off. But it does beg the question, what would blow these bricks away? Well, of course, our guide told us that there was an elemental in there. And I've actually never encountered an elemental before, so I really wasn't even sure kind of what that meant. I mean, it made sense that whatever I was picking up on, whatever I was sensing, felt different. It didn't feel like a spirit, kind of like, or energy, like I'm used to feeling. So I found that fascinating, and of course I eventually looked into elementals a little bit more, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But yeah, it was the first time I had ever experienced anything like that, so it was very interesting. Now, of course, next, during our visit, our tour, there were a couple different things that we did. One was we visited a couple of houses that, of course, had stories of people who had passed at those houses. One was actually, y'all, it was so creepy. And I felt like something was watching us the whole time we were there. And the truth was, my energy basically just lit up before we ever really even arrived at the house. We were just starting to get to the house and pull up to it. And I could start feeling this just huge energy. In fact, at first we couldn't go in the homes, but we could go, they all are surrounded by these beautiful fenced in areas. So, we could go through the gate, and we were in, the front yard, but we weren't able to actually go inside. That one in particular is actually closed right now. And I was just amazed though by how much energy there was there. And when we first got off the bus and went to walk up there, I'm just looking at my husband going, I don't know if I can do this. I mean, I was really struggling to get the energy under control, where I could even walk up to the house. And what was fascinating is actually as soon as we drove up, I immediately had this lady in my head. And as they were telling the story, come to find out, the lady that had died there, she died in her 90s. I feel like she was 98. I can't remember exactly. And I don't have that in front of me to tell you for sure. But she was, it was back, I think she died in 1969. So she was kind of this sweet, hippie type lady with that kind of, really fun, kind of laid back energy. And like I said, I picked up on her right away before we ever got off the bus. Like I said, she was sort of in my head, and she was really adorable, and I would have loved to have talked to her more had we been there longer. But there was also something just really dark. It just felt dark. And like I said, there was a place on the house that I could kind of pinpoint that I swear there was something in that spot just watching everything we did. It was I'm not going to lie, it was kind of unnerving. As the story goes, there are people that have said that they've seen not really a person, but kind of an entity, like a shape, like a dark shape that was really large. And they saw it standing behind the person that was on the property. But I don't know that it was identifiable in any way. And I know I was struggling to really identify anything about it. It's also something to note that many of these houses that we're talking about, many of the houses in the Memphis area, in fact, that we saw, they were built in the Civil War time. And so you would have several of those that would end up being used as hospitals and such, because, there was actually quite a bit of wartime activity in that area. So, they would turn these homes into hospitals during that time. But anyway, this home, of course, was no exception, and people have said that they feel this dark energy when they're there, and I definitely felt it, and really, I couldn't identify it as anything, as a person. It just felt like a lot of energy. So that was, that one really that one creeped me out. I won't deny that. But then next door, just right down the way, actually there was a house in between. There was another house that there's a lot of history on, in fact, because one of the family members apparently was sort of obsessed with journaling. So he would write down everything that happened in that house. So they have really good records of things that happened. And they tell the story of the owner was sick, and they were doing exploratory surgery on him. And of course, in that time, they were probably using ether and on the kitchen table and whatnot. So probably not the most clean environment. But evidently, he actually died during the surgery. She told the story that he sat up on the table in the middle of the surgery and said, "I just had the strangest dream," and then fell back and of course died at that point. And there are people that say that they've seen him in the home. There's a writing desk, I believe, on the second floor that people have reported seeing him sitting there, and I think a couple of them said once they sort of acknowledged and saw him that he kind of disappeared. And of course, I felt some energy at that home, but it felt very normal. It was nothing dark or anything like that. Just kind of the former occupants hanging around. And there's a couple others I want to go over too, just because the stories are so interesting. And of course, here in a minute, I'm going to talk a little bit more about what some of this means. So these are just some really good examples. But one of them was what is now an apartment complex. And it was once a marine hospital. And there's something you may not know about Memphis is there was actually quite a substantial yellow fever outbreak in Memphis. So at this hospital, of course, there were a lot of people, a lot of soldiers that were treated at this hospital. And this is where it gets weird, because the building, y'all, is beautiful. It is an absolutely stunning building, and it's somewhere, if I were living in a town that had a lot of historic places, you would want to live there, but I wouldn't want to live here. But anyway, so they had what was called a body chute. Yeah, you heard that right, a body chute. So think of a laundry chute, and you know how that would go maybe down to a basement or something so you could sort the laundry and wash. Well, they used a chute for bodies. And part of that, of course, was so they weren't kind of constantly wheeling these people around that had passed. It freaked other people out, quite frankly. And of course, that doesn't help their, mental state that, all these people were dying around me. So they would use this chute, and they would send them down to the morgue, or I guess what they had set up as a morgue. Here's the thing, though. As medicine wasn't really that modern then, there were times that the people sent down the chute hadn't actually passed away yet. So I'm sure you can imagine there were probably some screams and things like that would happen as, these people would wake up, or as they were, being sent to the morgue. So as the story goes, when the building was being converted, the chute area was turned into a stairwell. And they say that the workers would frequently have to just stop working. They couldn't put in really a full day. They would really only be able to work maybe a few hours at a time, because they would hear noises, they would hear screaming, and they would start to actually feel physically ill. So I guess they were picking up on that energy that was in the building, and possibly hearing entities that were still there. And that one, once again, I didn't really separate any individuals as I picked up on the energy, but I felt my energy levels spiked, and it felt like it was just sort of people that had been through there before. But again, it felt like there were a lot There were a lot of them, a large number. So one of the last places we visited on our little tour was a fountain. And come to find out, y'all, it was actually right across the street from our hotel. But we had just gotten there that day and, of course, gone straight out to the thing. So we didn't see it and didn't realize it until the next day that it was right there. And it's really a beautiful fountain in a little park. It's really lovely, actually. But as the story goes, the floor of the fountain, I think it used to be deeper, but it also used to be slanted. So, of course, you get algae and whatnot on it, and it would be slick. And there were a lot of people that actually didn't like the fountain. And that's because it evidently had been donated by a local madam. And people didn't really like that. In fact, if you see, there's a statue in the middle. And if I remember right, the lady that's on the statue is topless. So I'm sure that went over well back in the day. But anyway, as the story goes, there was a young boy. I believe he was inside the fountain, maybe playing, but he slipped and he fell in the water. But what makes this worse is that no one came to his aid. There were many people around, and they just watched, and they just let him drown in this fountain. And I really couldn't get over that. That one really got to me a little bit. And of course, I immediately felt him. As soon as we were walking up, I could feel a young man there. So, that one kind of hurt my heart, how that went. And again, I'm going to get into a little bit more about that in just a second. But I am going to tell you about one more. Our car, when you're in those downtown areas, often you have to valet park your car. You can't park it yourself. They have to go take it to some, unknown tower somewhere and park it. So we were going out for the day. I think this was the next day. And the young man that was working the valet desk that had gone to get the car, he's, oh, you like spooky places? Oh, have you been to these? And he called off a couple of other places that he suggests we might try to visit. And I thought, well, we can probably at least drive by. Timing there was really odd. A lot of things would close by about 5, and then you were kind of trying to figure out what to do with yourself between then and dinner, because you didn't really want to go back to the hotel and for an hour and then leave again. So there were a couple times that we would just kind of drive around and look for these different places. And this one in particular, I had looked it up. I Googled it, of course, and found out it had recently been sold. So actually it was closed. I'm guessing the new owners were maybe renovating it. But it was absolutely stunning. This place was gorgeous. And a lot of the photos you found were from weddings. It had been used as a wedding venue, evidently for quite some time. But of course, like a lot of these other places, back in the day, it had been a hospital during the Civil War. And evidently, in Memphis, that comes with a lot of energy. So we find it, and as soon as we drove up, we hadn't even really driven through the gate yet, and I was like, yep, this place is haunted as fuck. And so we basically drive up. I took like 3 pictures from the car, mind you, and then we left. And, we visited a few other places too, but this kind of gives you an idea of what we encountered while we were there, which I found fascinating. I actually really enjoyed it. I love going to see all the different places and just kind of feeling all the different energy and whatnot. And of course, now I'm like, maybe I should be a ghost hunter. This would be fun. But anyway, so I guess my question comes to, what did we encounter while we were at all these places? Because, hauntings don't always mean ghost. Like I said, sometimes I was picking up on different people or different, spirits. But sometimes it's just energy. And it may just be energy that's left over from an event that happened. In the one case, there was an elemental. So that's a completely different thing. And then, of course, the last place we had even more, which we'll get to in a second. Because we discovered about a day later, I think, that in the 30 seconds that I was in front of that last house, I evidently let my guard down enough to pick up a fallen, which is no fun, let me tell you. And we're going to talk about that in a second, like I said. But first, let's start with this elemental. Like I said, I could feel this energy, but I couldn't figure it out. And of course, like I said at the time, I didn't know what an elemental was. I'd never encountered one. And I find this journey so fascinating because as much as I've learned and as far as I've come and as much as I think I know, there's so much. There's just so much that I just don't. There's so many layers, so many things. So anyway, what is an elemental? Well, I decided to do some research because I wanted to know. I found that energy fascinating and I wanted to know what it meant. So an elemental, it's basically an interdimensional being that can move through the different planes. And they're generally going to have a strong bond with nature. Some have said that elementals are actually guardians of the earth, which I think actually makes a lot of sense. You may know, if already, that there are 4 elements of nature. So that's going to be earth, water, fire, and air. And these are also often associated with the directions north, south, east, and west. I don't know if you guys knew that. That's something fairly new for me to learn as well. And these elementals are often described basically as really powerful beings that can really influence and shape and sometimes, I think, even represent these elements. So let's start with earth elementals. They're usually known as gnomes, associated with the earth and north for the direction. This represents material possessions, fertility, stability, hard work, nourishment, and order. They are believed to reside in the forest, the mountains, and caves. In some legends, they're even described as caretakers of the natural world, and that they possess a great wisdom about plants and minerals, which, I mean, that makes a lot of sense, right? And there are a lot of people that say that they're protectors of sort of hidden treasures, maybe things that lie beneath mines or even under mountains or deserts. And, they probably like gardens. I bet that's where the tradition is coming from, for people to put a gnome in their garden to protect their garden. How neat is that? I love that. So next we have water elementals, and they're associated with the direction of west. They're often referred to as undines or nymphs, and of course they're connected to the element of water. These beings will often inhabit lakes or rivers or oceans. And of course, in mythology, they're often depicted as, beautiful, ethereal creatures, and their actions are believed to be linked to the ebb and flow of water itself. And of course, they represent everything that has to do with emotion and intuition. And of course, with water being ruled by the moon, this element will also deal with healing, cleansing, emotional release, clarity, inner reflection, and even forgiveness. Now, the fire elemental, that's going to be associated with the south. They're also known as salamanders. These are fiery beings that are often, they're going to be depicted as just pure flame. And they're believed to dwell in places like volcanoes and other fiery places. Probably considered both powerful and a bit temperamental. So, they're capable of some big destruction and some transformation. You'll often find they're associated with that heat of the summer, because, that's kind of ruled by the blazing sun. So, they would be associated with that heat. And of course, the fire represents power and vitality, transformation, passion, strength, and drive. You light a fire under someone and get them moving, that drive. So it's often invoked for power and for action. And last, of course, are air elementals, and that's associated with the east direction. They are sylphs, is what they're called, Sylph. Now, they're thought to live in the skies, sometimes seen as invisible beings. There are some cultures that they believe that they're messengers of the wind, guiding the wind as it flows through the atmosphere. They often believe that these elementals don't take on a physical form, but it's seen kind of in wispy fancies, much like a cloud, I would say. So this is going to be associated with the mind. Often the season of spring is associated with it as well. So air is going to represent things like intellect, goals, ambition, fun, communication, and strategy. So I guess with all of that in mind, perhaps there is an elemental that resides in the mounds of Memphis. I'm thinking an earth elemental that was trying to protect that area. So that's why they didn't want people storing things there or walling it up and whatnot. So maybe that was its way of protecting the earth there. It's really neat. So now let's talk about some of these houses and what we may have encountered there, and the fountain with the little boy. Because, first you have ghosts, and I think that's what most people think of when you think of something being haunted. There's a ghost. And of course, when we talk about a ghost, we're usually referring to that lingering spirit of someone who is deceased. And, some of these entities, people believe that they kind of retain a level of consciousness and actually a personality. Maybe they're often associated with unfulfilled desires or unresolved issues, or maybe they have a strong emotional connection to the particular place where they are, or maybe a person in that place. In fact, ghosts, are often perceived as intelligent entities that can interact with the living. And, some of these stories that we've heard, maybe you've heard or seen, that's exactly what was happening. People would see the man at his writing desk. There was a story that we were told, some young ladies that were staying at one of the homes, and one of them, something would come and grab her ponytail and pull her hair. So I do believe that there are times when ghosts really can interact with us. People talk about seeing things move in their homes and things like that. And I mean physical things, something gets shoved off of a shelf and things like that. Lights turning on and off, those kinds of things. So, and I think often when they're doing that, there's probably something they're trying to tell us, maybe something that they want us to know. So, that's what a ghost is. It's that lingering spirit of someone who's passed. And then on the other hand, when we mention energy, when you're looking at it in the context of a haunting, it's probably residual or maybe imprinted energies. It may not be tied to a specific consciousness or a specific person, personality, but it may just represent the emotion or energetic imprints that were left behind by maybe events that took place there. Maybe there were some really intense emotions that happened. I believe there may be times when there was something traumatic in the way someone passed, or like I said, the events that happened that and it may have happened multiple times or something that causes that energy to stay behind or to be seen or felt there. Think about some of those Civil War hospitals. You probably have a lot of young men that died in those hospitals in that area, and it may just be sort of a collective energy of all the negativity that's associated with a war, because of course there's negativity associated with that. And I feel like that's what I was getting when I was at the one house I was telling you about, where I felt like something was watching us. I think there was just sort of a collective energy that was left there for what had happened in that particular space. Because I couldn't separate it. I couldn't feel sort of more than one soul like I had in the other places. It just felt like just this thing. But I tell you, it was, it really was creepy, and it was pretty strong. So there was definitely a difference, though, in the energy and then the different people I had picked up on. And something to bring up, too, let's say you're trying to clear a home or a building or something like that. And you need to clear it of something that's there. You're going to have to start to distinguish what you're dealing with. There may be layers of these various things. And, ghosts, you can often help them to move on. They may be there, like we said, they may have experienced something traumatic when they passed and that they just didn't want to leave. So maybe what we can do is we connect with them and we help them move onto God's light. That's something that we practice and that we could do through a theta practice. And one thing I found quite fascinating when we were on our tour was our guide was a paranormal investigator. So, these are those folks that they're going to go out to haunted houses and such, and, they're trying to find evidence of what might be there. And they often use equipment. This is equipment that, it picks up energy of some kind and things like that. And that's what they're, sometimes they have a lot of equipment that they use. But in this particular instance, when we went to the fountain, she's, hey, do y'all want to do some paranormal investigating? Sure. So she brings out this equipment, and it's a little device, and forgive me, I can't remember what it's called, but it basically picks up energy. And so she says, you could hold it, and maybe you ask the ghost, in this case, a little boy, and I think there were some others around there too, but he was the strongest that I picked up on. So maybe you say, turn this light red, because there's a little light on the device. Or maybe you ask him to turn it green or something like that. And so, of course, different people were trying it and asking questions with the little device. And, of course, somebody offered it to me. And I know, I hope I wasn't rude when I said it, but I was like, no, it's fine. I don't need that. I'm actually a medium. I'm picking up on them already. So I went to talk to the young lady because I was curious. I was kind of validating some stuff that I was picking up. And what was really funny was, we were talking and I explained, who I was and what I was picking up. And she shared with me, she goes, yeah, I don't think he likes me. And I was like, really? And it was kind of a joke. And I thought, really? I wonder, that seems odd. Why wouldn't he like you? So at one point I asked him, and I'm not being ugly, okay? I did tell her this. She knows. She's fully aware. I said, he kind of doesn't. But, he's a kid. He was very young. And when he died, people just stood around and watched him. And they didn't help. And basically what he was conveying to me was, I'm not going to perform for you. So they bring these groups there and they want him to perform. They hand them these little devices and, hey, why don't you talk to him and ask him to do something? And basically he's just not interested. I think what I picked up on was that it reminds him of, people have gawked at him before and it didn't end well. So he's just, he's not interested in doing that. Maybe if it was someone else different, doing it differently, or my understanding is there was a child out there at an event she was part of, and the child saw some things that led them to believe that the little boy was there and kind of wanted to play with him. So I think it's what he wants to do, and which is very much like a child, right? It fit his age so perfectly. But the truth is, I think anybody is entitled to feel that way, especially if people watched and didn't bother to help you. I don't blame him. I wouldn't want to perform either, and so the lights on the little equipment, never changed. And, he talks to who he wants to talk to. So I do find that interesting as well, that, these spirits, they do still have a personality. And I'll never forget, I have a friend that I encountered something kind of dark one time, and it freaked me out. It kind of scared me. And I asked some of the people in my group, we all support each other on our journeys and whatnot. What do I do? And one of the girls said, talk to it, see what it wants. And so that's what I find interesting about ghosts and spirits in that manner, is that you can do that. You can ask them, talk to them, find out what it is they want to know. You can protect yourself. You have sovereignty over your body, over your spirit. Set your boundaries of what you're not allowed to do this. You're not allowed to come in my space, whatever. But most that I have encountered do have a personality. They have feelings they can convey and things that they want to say. So I find that fascinating. And it's also, again, when you're just dealing with an energy, you don't really have that. You may be able to pick up on emotions within that energy, often a lot of sadness or anger or something like that. Because that's when the clear senses that you could pick up on would be the emotion. But yeah, a lot of times with ghosts, you can have basically have a conversation with them in a sense. So I found the little boy kind of fascinating, and I felt bad for him for what had happened to him. I thought that was actually horrible, but it did kind of make me giggle a little bit when he was like, I don't like her bringing people around here. So, good for him for standing up for himself. But since we've been on this tour, it's really gotten me thinking a lot more. And one of the questions that really came up for me was, should we help these spirits move on? I mean, in Theta, we heal. I know mediums, ghost hunters, all the things that that's part of what they do if they're encountering a spirit that's still here, that hasn't crossed over. They help them do that. They help them go to the light. You can actually use, Theta practices really to do work like clearing homes of entities or energy or whatever. But should we? I mean, if we did that, let's say, and that little boy moved on, then what? Does it change what people see when they go to these places? Does it destroy the haunting business in Memphis? Or does that just become just stories that they tell? Because the stories are obviously still valid. And I mean, I certainly never saw anything physically while we were there. I didn't see any ghost or anything like that. I don't know that anyone that was on the tour with us did either. I guess what I'm saying is, what is our responsibility as healers? How far are we supposed to go? Are we supposed to, when we go places like this, should I have tried to connect and try to help those spirits in some way? But then there's also, how many of these spirits just don't want to go? They want to be here. We're going to struggle to help them cross over or to have them go to the light. So it was just something that came up for me. And of course, I'm not saying that anybody's business, their haunting business is worth a spirit being stuck somewhere. Okay, please don't misunderstand what I'm trying to say. I just find it interesting that there's a lot of factors involved in some of this when you really think about it. So it does make me wonder sometimes, because I encounter situations a lot where something will happen. I meet someone that's having, some kind of challenge or something, and I'm immediately going, I bet we could help them. I bet that's a situation where, if we could work with them, we might could help them be better and help them feel better and whatnot. And this is no different. That, I guess, trying to figure out what to heal. And I feel like you're supposed to heal everything. But, the person or the entity in this case, I guess, they kind of have to want to be healed, So anyway, it's just some of the many conversations and thoughts that run around in my head from day to day. So you're welcome. Okay, back to the story. So I want to talk just for a second about that fallen that I mentioned. I don't know if y'all understood what I said. I said a fallen, Fallen. And by the way, Gina and I talked about this on the Facebook Live. And I actually want to do a future episode on fallen and waywards. If you guys don't know what that is, we'll get into that. And also followers, which actually our conversation on Facebook was the first time I learned about followers. It had been mentioned, I think, during our Theta class at one point, but I kind of didn't remember, and learned more about followers on our live. But the truth was, in this particular instance, I was shocked that I had picked one up. Y'all, I'm serious. I was at that house for 30 seconds. I'm not joking about that. I never got out of the car. But I told you, I mean, I could feel the energy as we drove up. I mean, I remember turning to my husband and saying, this place is fucking haunted. There's a lot of energy here. The good thing is, though, Gina helped me get rid of it, because the reality was it made me miserable. I was depressed. I was a weepy mess, y'all. Everything was just negative. And when she tapped in, she actually told me that there were actually two. And that the truth was, she immediately knew where I had picked them up. Because, of course, when I would take pictures of the creepy houses, I was sending them to her as we visited. I'd be look at this creepy house and send it to her. But really, y'all, just that fast. And I was shielded to the hilt. I told y'all that. But just that fast, it attached to me. And let me tell you something. A fallen is no joke. I think the name kind of says it, right? It's fallen. So it's basically a demon. So it's some pretty dark energy. So I had let my guard down for a second. Is that what it was? So I started thinking back to when we were at the house, and so, well, I was feeling some anxiety at that time. I mean, we were in a bit of a hurry. The place was closed, but there was a truck there. You could tell they were probably doing some work on it. But it looked like the gate to drive up into the driveway was probably about to close. My husband was getting really anxious. He's like, I am not getting locked in here by this house. Hell no. I mean, you're just telling me that this place is fucking haunted as hell and I'm not getting locked in here. And, I'm not going to lie. We were a little lost, not too bad, but a little bit lost, and not in that great of an area of town. And of course it was starting to get dark and things like that. So was that it? Was that how? I don't know. Maybe. Probably. But she also said that they can pick up on my, let's say, abilities. They are evidently attracted to this kind of witchy thing that I have. And I think that they're actually somewhat attracted to people that work with light, the spiritual people doing some of the stuff that we do. I think they're attracted to that stuff. But you know what? It took help to get that off of me. And I guess I wanted to touch on that as well as some of the other things, just to say, be aware. I find almost anything, physical or mental, can have a metaphysical connection. And I'm not sure I believed that before, but the more theta work I've done, and the more things that I've worked on myself or had a practitioner work on for me, the number of times that metaphysical, spiritual situation was causing physical or mental issues is just shocking to me. And look, there are medical things too. Okay, hear me. I'm not saying that. Some things are medical and require medical intervention. Okay, that is the truth. We're not telling anyone to not seek medical advice when you need to. Okay, I would never do that. But I have really been shocked at how often a metaphysical thing or an emotional, spiritual thing, that you handle that and the pain or the mental issue ends up getting resolved, or at the very least helped. And so I just, like I said, I find that fascinating that there's almost always a connection or something that needs to be resolved or released or healed. And I mean almost always. And again, it may still go a little further than that. There still may need to be medical attention in some way. But it's interesting how much it could possibly go hand in hand, either be resolved, go hand in hand with a medical intervention, or something with theta where you're releasing all that, then goes hand in hand with therapy to make your therapy even more effective. It's fascinating, y'all. It's just really neat stuff. Okay, so all that to say that things just aren't always as they seem. You know, you see things on TV or in a movie, and that's just not always real. Okay, some of them may be based at least somewhat in reality or how things would happen for real, but most of them really aren't. And I know it's fun, you know, the creepy things, and I know people that are into all the creepy things, but there's more than just, you know, visiting these haunted houses or watching ghost hunters. You know, there's actually some stuff that can get a little serious. And if you don't know how to deal with these things, you may want to get some help. Maybe learn how to protect yourself, for starters. It's a great way to begin. Or if you're having issues, especially after you've been to one of these places or done one of these things, maybe speak with someone who does energy work that may be able to help you. It could be Gina, it could be myself. There are others that do theta. Y'all, there are so many types of energy healing out there. You know, look for what resonates with you and then find the help that you need. And I'll tell you, one way I realized what was going on with me with that fallen was how much my attitude changed, and it changed quickly. I mean, all of my emotions, everything just changed really quickly. And I've kind of learned how to analyze and sort of understand if whatever's going on with me is mine or if it's not. You know, I can look at it and go, okay, is this me? Maybe I can actually explain it and kind of deal with it. And okay, that's mine. Or sometimes it literally feels a bit foreign. And that day, it just felt so odd. And for the life of me, I couldn't get it under control. No matter what I did, I'm telling you, y'all, a weepy mess. It was ridiculous. So, of course, as you practice, you can kind of start sensing that in yourself. And so when I kind of realized, wait a minute, this isn't adding up. I'm not sure this is mine. So I kind of suspected something was up. I asked Gina, hey, can you just kind of scan and see what's going on so I can kind of see what I'm dealing with? Because I was really struggling to even figure it out for myself. And of course, she was gracious enough to help me deal with it. And the truth is, once she did, I was immediately lighter, immediately, and able to handle my emotions and kind of get myself under control. And this all happened, it happened fast. Basically, we went that one evening. The next day wasn't too bad, but we were also pretty busy. But it wasn't too bad. But then the day after that, it hit me. And I already had, I think, a lot of emotions going on that day. But I think what happened was this entity, this fallen, I think they were kind of playing with those emotions and amplifying them because of that attachment. And it got real quick. And at least, you know, for me, I have at least an idea of what I'm doing. But you know what? Maybe that's part of it too. I mean, I know stuff and I've learned a lot of stuff, but I'm still learning. And I don't know about y'all, but I don't know anyone that knows all of it. And maybe that makes us more susceptible, because if we're more open intuitively and we're exploring more things, then that may make us a little more susceptible to the dark entities being attracted to our light and whatnot. But it's still a little scary, to be honest, though. Okay, before we go, I want you to consider one more thing. things like the ghost, going on these ghost tours and watching scary movies and all the creepy things that I know you guys all love, especially in October. Those things can actually lower your vibration, kind of depending on your intention as you go into it. And when your vibration is lower, that's probably going to make you a little more susceptible as well. And look, no one's saying don't enjoy the things that you enjoy, okay? Absolutely enjoy those things. Just maybe be more aware of it. Maybe there's some things you can learn to help take care of yourself a little better, maybe protect yourself, some tools you can use and things like that, just so that you don't leave yourself open and vulnerable. I want you guys to just take care of yourselves. And I may say this a million times when I do this podcast, but never ever be afraid to ask for help. If there's something you don't understand, something you need to know, and it's not just about theta sessions and things like that, ask. And if I don't know, I will find you someone who does. I will point you in a direction to get the answers that you need. So never, ever, ever be afraid to ask for help. I suspect you are not the only one with that question. Thanks so much for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure and like and rate and follow and do all the things for our podcast. It really does help us out. Links and any other important things you need to know will be in the show notes, so make sure to check those out. If you have ideas of topics you'd like to hear about or questions you want us to answer, drop those on the Pretend Cajun page on Facebook or Instagram. And if you're interested in theta healing or maybe a reading, head over to the website, which is pretendcajun.com, to schedule a time. In the meantime, take care of yourself and each other. Until next time.